The National Communications Network, in collaboration with the National Center for Resource Development and the Ministry of Education, present CXC in Focus, a focus on the key subject areas of mathematics and English for students preparing to write the exams.
Welcome to another program in the series CXC Mathematics in Focus. Lesson 11, Composition of Functions. In this lesson, we are going to look at the composition of functions. Consider the function in which f maps set A to set B and g maps set B to set C. This can be represented as f such that A is mapped onto B, g such that B is mapped onto C, that is set B mapped onto set C. Let 5 be an element of set A. Then its image, f of 5, is in set B. Set B is the domain of set C, and G maps the domain element f of 5 of set B to an element of set C, which can be represented as G f of 5. G f of x is called the composition of two functions from two distinct domains. Here is an example of the composition of functions. Let f of x equal to x minus 2 and g of x is equal to x squared. Find g f of x and f g of x. F of x is equal to x minus 2. G f of x would mean g operating on the value for f of x, which is x minus 2. So it will be g into x minus 2, which is equal to, the function for g is squaring. So it will be equal to x minus 2 all squared. When that is worked out, we have x minus 2 all squared equal to x squared minus 4x plus 4. F g of x is equal to f of x squared, because g of x is x squared. So f operating of g of x is f operating on x squared, which will give us, the f function is saying whatever is in the bracket, we subtract 2. X squared is in the bracket, so x squared minus 2. And you would notice that g f of x is not the same as f g of x. So composition of function is not what we call commutative. Here is another example. Given that f of x is equal to a half x and g of x is equal to x minus 2, where x is in the set of real numbers, which is R, find g f of x. G f of x is equal to g of half x, because f of x is half x. So g of half x is equal to, now whatever is in the bracket we must subtract 2. So g half of x is equal to half x minus 2. Here's a question taken from a past CXC paper. We work it out for you. The function f and g are defined as follows. F of x is equal to 2x squared minus 5. G of x is equal to 3x minus 2. We are asked to evaluate f of negative 3. Now this is asking us to substitute the value f of negative 3 in the function f of x. That is negative 3 in f of x will be f of negative 3, which is equal to 2 times negative 3 square, which is 9, minus 5. 2 nines 18 minus 5 is equal to 13. So the answer is on the right hand side there. Then we are required to evaluate g f of negative 3. We calculated earlier f of negative 3, which is 13. So we would use 13 in the g function. So it is g of 13, and the g function is saying 3 times what is in the bracket minus 2, which will be 3 times 13 minus 2, which will be 39 minus 2, which will give us 37. The third part of the question asks us to write an expression for the inverse of g. If you look at the g function, as explained in the last lesson, using the function machine, we multiply by 3, then subtract 2. If we reverse that process, we will add 2, then divide by 3. If you remember that, the inverse then would be x plus 2 all divided by 3. If you can't do it mentally, then you will exchange x and y values and then solve for y to get the inverse. The fourth part of the question asks us to determine the value of x for which g inverse x is equal to 4. G inverse x is equal to 4 would say what we must substitute in the inverse function to get 4. Let's see. The inverse of g is x plus 2 divided by 3. X in the inverse function is 4, so we can substitute 4 for x, so it will be 4 plus 2, which is 6. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So x would be 2, and if you apply 2 in the g function, you will end up with 4 as the answer, because 3 times 2 is 6. 6 take out 2 will give us the 4. So we can check by proving. The fifth part of the question, write an expression for g f of x. G f of x and f of x is given as 2x squared minus 5. G f of x, g is saying whatever you have in the brackets, multiply by 3, then subtract 2. So g f of x can be expressed as 3 into 2x squared minus 5 minus 2. Here is your problem for today. Given that f is such that x is mapped onto 3 minus x, and g is a function such that x is mapped onto x plus 2 divided by x minus 5, calculate g of 2. Part B. State the value of x for which g of x is not defined. Part C. Derive an expression for g f of x. And the last part, calculate the value of f inverse of 4. This question is taken from CXC January 2000. Here is a solution to the problem given in the last lesson. F and g are functions defined as follows. F such that x is mapped onto 7x plus 4. G is such that x is mapped onto 1 over 2x. The first part, find g of 3. We look for the g function. G is 1 over 2x. In the g function g of 3, we substitute for x 3. So 1 over 2x will be 1 over 2 times 3, which will be 1 over 6. The second part, find the value of f of negative 2. Now, the f function is saying that x is mapped onto 7x plus 4. When negative 2 is substituted for x, 7x will be negative 14. Negative 14 plus 4 will give us negative 10. So f of negative 2 is equal to negative 10. Then we are asked to find the inverse, f inverse of 11. F inverse of 11, if you look at the f function, mentally you could work out what that inverse would be. We multiply by 7, then add 4. You reverse that, it is subtracting 4 and then divide by 7. Follow that? The function is made up of multiplying by 7, then add 4. The inverse would be subtract 4, then divide by 7. Now, if we have to substitute 11 in inverse, it would mean 11 minus 4 divided by 7. 11 minus 4 is 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1. So f inverse of 11 is 1. If you can't do the problem mentally, then you will exchange values, solve, and then substitute 11. You will end up with the same answer. This brings us to the end of today's program, CXC Mathematics in Focus.
Students, you would recall that we had listed 6 characteristics or elements of a good short story. We have already dealt in detail with the idea of plot, which we said was a series of closely related incidents put together to resolve a conflict or to reveal character. Of course, you, the student, would have to carefully choose and arrange the incidents in such a way that the reader is likely to ask, what next is likely to happen? Another important element of the short story is what is termed characterization. By this term, we mean the way the writer presents the characters in the story. Of course, we want our characters to be interesting and believable, and therefore, as writers, we must be aware of the many ways in which we can make our characters authentic or real. Before we examine the term characterization, we need to know a little more about characters. In a novel and in a play, it is common to find a large number of characters. You are aware of the many characters in Crick Crack Monkey, The Pearl, or Green Days by the River. Similarly, you are aware of the many characters in Macbeth, The Merchant of Venice, or The Glass Menagerie. These many characters are involved in many types of actions over many days, weeks, or years. The short story, however, is different in this respect. In this genre, there are very few characters. In the cases of the short story, you are required to write for CXC. You would appreciate that you have about 45 minutes to create and present your characters in about 450 words. This does not allow you to create characters who are very complex, as the case of Macbeth, Kino, or Rosalind. The time and limited number of words do not allow you to present many characters in your short story. It is essential, therefore, to write your story by focusing on one main character who faces a particular problem or crisis, and one or two other characters who involve themselves in the action to either help the main character to resolve the crisis or to make him fail in his or her efforts. In the story, after 20 years, there are three characters: the policeman, Jimmy Wells, and Silky Bob. We recognize the crisis faced by Jimmy Wells, who uses the policeman to arrest Silky Bob because he could not muster the courage to put behind bars someone who was once a childhood friend. In the other story, written as a response to a picture, the main character is a grandfather who has strayed far from home, a scared, confused old man, once a renowned doctor who had tried to fight a disease that now overpowers him. The only other character is the old man's granddaughter, who finally finds him and rescues him. This is a simple, highly emotional story that focuses on the dilemma of an old man and the love and concern of a caring granddaughter. You may be wondering, whom do I choose as my main character and whom do I choose as the other characters? Well, that depends on the topic that you choose to write on. Of course, your characters need not be human as well, or exclusively so. You could recall that in many of the stories you read as a child, the principal and supporting characters were either animals, as in the fables of Aesop, or focuses on nature, as in the story of Amalivaka, written by Jan Carew. The vast majorities of stories submitted for a CSEC English A examination have human characters, but this does not mean that you cannot write a story where a man or woman battles against a hostile environment or particularly smart fish or animals, as the old man Santiago did so admirably in The Old Man and the Sea. As we said before, your choice of characters would depend on the topic you choose. Of course, if you choose to write a story based on this picture, your characters would of necessity be directly related to the picture. In this case, the hero may be a man, a woman, a child, or an animal. For example, in a picture provided here, your hero may very well be a young child who has just won a competition or has just been the cause of jubilant celebration. In picture 2 below, the main character may be either the old female or the young girl. It tells the story of a once happy time in contrast to the now strained relationship with her mother or grandmother. In picture 3, the choice of character is more restricted. Your main character may be either the dejected batsman who was on the verge of winning a vital match, or the exuberant bowler who snatched a victory for his team at the last moment against the tremendous odds. Of course, in this case, your focus is restricted to cricket. And of course, for heightened drama or dramatic effect, the whole story can be written based on the last over of the match. Many years ago, CXC provided a picture of the battered, broken down house, and students were asked to write a story based on the picture. Sadly, many students failed in their responses because they wrote a description, not a story. One particularly creative student personified the house and told the story, making the house the main character. This is highly unusual, but such a story usually indicates a student who is willing to think outside of the box. We will end this lesson by looking briefly at the way you're expected to present or reveal your characters. Such characters are revealed in 4 ways: the way they look, the way they dress, the way they speak, and the things that they do. Your details must be carefully chosen so that they are consistent with the lifelike persons, real persons in the real world. A character with a scar around the cheek, squinting eyes, and a hard-set mouth suggests a person who is evil, roguish, or bent on ill ways. On the other hand, a brightly dressed, smiling, and bubbling character may suggest a happy, contented person. These may not necessarily be true, but whatever details you use, they must be consistent with the type of person you have in mind. In the story After 20 Years, we see clearly the policeman and Silky Bob by the way the writer presents them. The old man in the other story is clearly someone of social standing, an impression we get from the clothes he wears. Similarly, we expect a farmer, a fisherman, or a doctor to speak as these people do, subject to the occasion and time, of course. And we expect them to do things consistent with who they are. We do not expect an ordinary person to jump into an airplane, start it up, and fly away to escape his pursuers. The details of every action must be carefully and particularly chosen. The reader, that is the examiner, must be able to picture your characters, must see what they look like, hear their speech, and recognize them as real and appreciate what they do because of what they are. Your characters must be alive, interesting and real, as are the characters in the stories you have read. So boys and girls, on behalf of the team Bibi Ali, Parmeshwar Lal, and Ron Chichester, I'm Ingrid Fong, saying thank you for viewing.
National Communications Network, in collaboration with the National Center for Resource Development and the Ministry of Education, present CXC in Focus, a focus on the key subject areas of mathematics and English for students preparing to write the exams.
Welcome to another program in the series CXC Mathematics in Focus. Lesson 12, Consumer Arithmetic, Profit and Loss. This lesson involves the calculation of profit, loss, cost price, selling price, percentage profit, and percentage loss. When the selling price of an article is greater than the cost price, there is a profit. Profit can be calculated by finding the difference between the selling price and the cost price. Profit is equal to selling price minus cost price, and if we use abbreviation, it is SP minus CP. We can see from the above that selling price is equal to profit plus cost price, and cost price is equal to selling price minus profit. Percentage profit is calculated as a percentage of the cost price, and it is given in this formula: percentage profit is equal to profit divided by cost price times 100, all expressed as a percentage. Example 1. A businessman bought 100 tins of mixed nuts at $1,520 each and sold them at $1,900 each. Calculate the percentage profit. Solution. Cost price for 1 tin of mixed nut is $15.20. Cost price for 100 tins of mixed nut, $15.20 times 100, which will give us 152,000. Selling price for 1 tin of mixed nut, $1,900. Selling price of 100 tins of mixed nut, 1,900 times 100, which is $190,000. Profit is equal to selling price minus cost price, which is equal to 190,000 minus 152,000, which will give us 38,000. Percentage profit is equal to profit divided by cost price times 100, which will be 38,000 divided by 152,000 times 100, and that will work out to be 25%. Percentage loss. When the selling price of an article is less than the cost price, there is a loss. Loss can be calculated by finding the difference between the cost price and the selling price. Loss is equal to cost price minus selling price. We can see from the above that the selling price is equal to the cost price minus loss. Percentage loss is calculated as a percentage of the cost price, as given in this formula. Percentage loss is equal to loss divided by cost price times 100, all expressed as a percentage. Example 2. A fruit vendor bought 50 melons at $210 each. The quality of the melons began to deteriorate, so she sold them at $200 each. Calculate the percentage loss. Solution. The cost price of 1 melon is $210. Cost price of 50 melons will be 210 times 50, which is $10,500. Selling price of 1 melon is $200. The selling price of 50 melon, 200 times 50, which is $10,000. Here you must note that instead of calculating for 50 melons, or in the case of the nuts, we can use one item and determine the percentage loss or the percentage profit. Loss is equal to cost price minus selling price. In this case, it is equal to 10,500 minus 10,000, which will give us 500. So loss percent is equal to loss divided by cost price times 100, which is equal to 500 divided by 10,500 times 100, which will give us a loss percent of 4.76. In summary, in this lesson, we noted that profit is equal to selling price minus cost price. Loss is equal to cost price minus selling price. Percentage profit is equal to profit divided by cost price times 100. Percentage loss is equal to loss divided by cost price times 100. This is your problem for today. The table shows Amanda's shopping bill. Some numbers were removed and replaced with letters. You have the items in the first column, quantity in the second column, unit price in the third column, and the total cost in the fourth column. First thing you're asked to do, calculate the values of A, B, C, and D. Second thing you're required to do, Amanda sold 6 of the 12 stickers which she had bought at 75 cents each, and the remaining stickers at 40 cents each. Show using calculations whether Amanda made a profit or loss on buying and selling stickers. This question is taken from CXC June 2005. Here is a solution to the problem given in the last lesson. Given that f of x is such that x is mapped onto 3 minus x, and g of x is such that g maps x onto x plus 2 divided by 5, you're required to find g of 2. We have to substitute 2 in the g function. Substituting 2 in the g function will give us numerator 4 and denominator minus 3. And that now can be expressed as minus 4 over 3, or minus 4/3. The value of x for which g of x is not defined is 5. This is an area you need to note. When a function is not defined at a particular value for x, you look at the rational function, that is a function as in the form given with a numerator and a denominator. You look for a value of x that will make the denominator 0. The value of x that will make that denominator 0 is 5. Hence, when x is equal to 5, the function is not defined. We were asked to find gf of x. F of x is equal to 3 minus x. Gf of x would be 3 minus x plus 2 divided by x minus 5, and when that is substituted, we'll end up with gf of x is equal to 5 minus x divided by minus x minus 2. minus x minus 2 in a denominator. Then we are asked to find f inverse of 4. F inverse of 4, if you recall, when you substitute 4 in the inverse, you will get minus 1. That is, f inverse of 4 is equal to 3 minus 4, which will give us minus 1. This brings us to the end of today's program, CXC Mathematics in Focus.
So far, we have looked at the kinds of stimuli that CXC wants you to respond to in our short stories. The examples of good story writing, the definition and importance of a good plot, and the necessity for well-rounded, motivated, and interesting characters. In this lesson, boys and girls, we'll briefly look at the importance of setting in the writing of your short story and the absolute necessity of your understanding of this term. By the term setting, we refer to the time the set of incidents happened, the location of the various actions, and the social circumstances prevailing at that time. In simple terms, we refer to the time and place in which the characters act out the plot of the story. In a novel or a play, the action usually takes place over a lengthy period of time, perhaps days, weeks, or even years. In contrast, the time allocated to the sequence of events in a short story is very limited. Usually, you are expected to focus on a particular moment in time in which the actions are concentrated. If the actions are stretched out over many days, then the choice of incidents is so focused that one gets the impression of continuous action to resolve a particular conflict. In the story After 20 Years, the policeman begins to move up the avenue at just before 10 o'clock. His conversations with Silky Bob and the narrative pertaining to the friendship between the two buddies take another few minutes. By the time the other tall policeman arrests Silky Bob, it is just about 15 or 20 minutes after 10 o'clock. You would observe that the writer chooses a small moment in time, focuses on the present action, while allowing space to let us know about the relationship between Jimmy Wells and Silky Bob while they were young men. Through the reflections of Silky Bob, we also learn that the lifestyles of the two friends diverged in totally different directions. But all the actions we learn about and all the information we know are revealed to us in a matter of minutes. In the story in which Suzanne finds her grandfather, we should recognize also that the whole story lasts for a few minutes only. The old man is hungry, tired, frightened and confused. He finds a shack, sits down, cradling his legs to his chest, and begins to rock back and forth. Suzanne, the loving granddaughter, finds him, comforts him, and leads him home. But by this time, within the space of a few minutes, this confused old man reveals a grateful smile and his face splits into a grin. But it is only in the last sentence that the writer reveals to us that the grandfather was a famous doctor who became the victim of Alzheimer's disease. Such concentrated action is what is expected when you write your stories for the CSEC English A examination. As further illustration of the necessity to control the time deviation of your story, we will take a look at some of the topics we selected in Lesson 8 and see what time span is necessary. If you choose to write a story entitled The Prize, for example, you may wish to focus on the last stages of a beauty contest, or you may wish to focus on the capture of a dangerous wanted criminal. You may even focus on the last rounds of a boxing match or the final stages of a motor racing competition. The advice here is to focus the sequence of events in a concentrated time frame, ensuring that the reader keeps asking himself, what next will happen? For example, you choose a topic such as, the day began perfectly, but I knew that it was going to end for me. You have to spend some time, perhaps 1/3 of the story, to create the atmosphere of the peaceful, perfect day. You then need, by careful selection of details and appropriate description, to show what the unexpected is and what gave rise to it. The balance is necessary because of the contrast in the term perfect and the term expected. So far, we have looked at setting in terms of time frame. It is important in writing a short story that the place be as real as possible so that the reader can picture the actual scene and imagine the characters in action. In the story After 20 Years, the writer deliberately sets the scene on an almost dark and empty street with chilly gusts of wind and fine cold drizzle with uncertain puffs of wind. Such a scene creates an atmosphere of expectancy, uncertainty, and mystery, and it is the perfect place to reveal the unexpected. In the story with the old man and the granddaughter, the old man is walking on a long, winding road with lush vegetation in the surrounding area and an abandoned shack with clinging green vines in the distance. It creates an atmosphere of loneliness in the midst of bright but wild and uncontrolled forces. This is the perfect setting for a man who often loses his memory, but it is also the perfect setting in which he recognizes the granddaughter. Too often students attempt to set a story in a location with which they are unfamiliar. It is always amusing to find Caribbean students setting their stories in a time and place location in which there is sleet and snow, winter and spring, and autumn and summer. Very often, students lose control of their stories because they cannot provide the essential details to create the desired atmosphere, and the reader gets the impression of something artificial. Similarly, students write about a beauty contest and try to fashion a story to present the final stages of the competition as a response to the topic, the prize. Very often, such students are not familiar with the appropriate terms, the functions of the various personalities, and the sequence of events in such a contest. In this case, the story comes across as contrived. Some students attempt to write stories with a historical flavor and perhaps set the scenes in the days of Christ or the Middle Ages or ancient Egypt. Some experiment with sci-fi and write either futuristic stories or stories that involve sophisticated space equipment and journeys into the far reaches of the universe. While this is good, students need to be familiar with the appropriate details. Students should bear these few pieces of advice as far as setting is concerned when writing the short story. Write about a historical time with which you are very familiar, preferably the present or the recent past. Write about places with which you are familiar, the streets you know, the houses you are accustomed to, the plants, animals, rivers and lakes that you know, the gardens and resorts you would have visited. Write about the things you know, the bicycles, the cellular phones, the minibus, the scooters, the parties, cricket, football and athletics. Avoid writing about skyscrapers, winter, shopping malls, aeroplanes, AK-47s, Olympics, golf and tennis, if you are not familiar with these things. Boys and girls, on behalf of the team, Bibi Ali, Parmeshwar Lal, and Ron Chichester, I'm Ingrid Kong saying thank you for viewing.